Okay, 9 o'clock. First of all, just good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here for the second session in our mini series. We really are so thankful that you'll be with us for the next 30 minutes. Although our session together today is quite brief, we are really confident that you'll find value in this session. So today's topic, transcendent leadership, how to discover your noble purpose, is the second, of course, of 8 mini sessions where David's going to be showing and sharing a little taste and a little flavor of what we will be covering at the Authentic Leadership Academy. So during the Academy, we'll of course be diving into this topic as well as several others in greater depth. And we're really excited. It's going to be a truly transformational experience. And as you listen to today's session, you might feel that you are called to join us for the Academy, and we would love to have you. Or perhaps you know someone you currently lead, someone who leads you, just someone you care about that's eager to infuse new passion, power, and purpose into this leadership. Because as we all know, in leadership and learning, the journey never ends. So thanks again for joining us this morning. And here's David.
Thank you, Kristen, as always, for setting the stage here and your usual commitment to service and creating a good space and your usual enthusiasm. Thank you so much for your leadership. Folks, I just want to start with a simple acknowledgement of our friends and family in Ukraine right now. And, this is a dark time for our world. And this is my way of doing my part to make this a better world. And I hope today to leave you some reflections on what we can each do to bring our light more fully to the world. I had a mentor tell me once, just you keep your light bright. That's our work in life, is to keep ourselves bright so that we can do our part to brighten the world. On that note, I also want to say that this is a privilege that we have together like this, that very few people in the world have a chance to think about what does it even mean to be a leader and how can we define our purpose. These are luxury discussions that we have that very few people in the world actually have an opportunity to stop and reflect on this material. So thank you again for joining me. Here's the curriculum over the next, it's the curriculum for the, I'm going to give you more of a detailed map as we move into further sessions, but this is the high level curriculum of what we're going to be doing in the 2.5 days. And it's the same curriculum that we're going to be following for me to give you a taste of what we're going to be doing in this Leadership Academy. So what we are on right now is session number 2, which is Transcendent Leadership, Leading with Purpose. So two things we're going to do today in this very short amount of time we have together. I'm going to talk for half an hour, and then I'll stay on the line for a few extra minutes for some questions and answers and some discussion for a few minutes afterwards. So the agenda is that we're going to talk about I'm going to talk about the 3 aspects of leadership, and then I'm going to introduce you to the power of transcendent leadership, awakening to a purpose that serves a noble cause. For those of you who've been around my work, this is a standard part of my presentation. I always talk about the difference between a boss and a leader. We're not going to get into this in a great deal of detail today, other than to say there's a transactional aspect of all of our work, and there's a transformational aspect. And we have to manage both. Some of us are prone toward the transaction. Some of us are more prone toward the transformational, but if we're not careful, we live in a transactional world. Check your email. Many of you are probably multitasking while you're listening. What you're doing is checking your emails or your text messages. Now, I don't know what's on those text messages. I had a text yesterday from a friend of mine who was listening to our webinar, and some of you were in the webinar yesterday, and was talking about a friend who's dying from cancer. That's a transformational conversation. So I am not here to be critical of anybody's multitasking, because I don't know what's in your life. But most of what we do on this little device of ours is quite transactional. It's the difference, folks, between a father and a dad. This is the transactional aspect of our work. This is the title versus the relationship that comes with being called a dad. Anybody can become a father. Anybody can become a mother. If the biological and the chemical is there, it's easy to take on that role. It's a lot harder to invest in being able to be worthy to be called dad, to be worthy to be called mom. Every person on this call had a father, but not everybody had dad. And if you can begin to understand the difference between a father and a dad, you begin to understand the difference between a boss and a leader. Now, I'm not going to get into this in a lot of detail. This is the transactional part of our work. This is the transformational part of leadership. And in a lot of the work that I do, I remind people that you can actually make the transactional part of your work transformational. Next time you're doing an email, which is 99% of emails are transactional, arranging things, sharing information, passing along data points. But if you stop and just say, I'm going to write a paragraph and talk about what this person means to me, you can begin to make that email transformational. Express appreciation. There's always an opportunity. When you go to buy your groceries, you can stop and make that cashier's day better rather than just this transaction. You spend your whole life in a transaction, folks, you're going to get to the end of your life and have it be meaningless. It's the transformational side that makes life meaningful. This, by the way, this is parenting. It's really hard to inspire your kids and to mentor your kids when you have to get them to get their darn homework done. And this is, by the way, folks, why we have grandparents, because grandparents can focus on the transformational side. Next time you're cooking supper tonight, you're cooking supper with a partner or a loved one or a child, that can be a transaction. Oh, let's get this dinner done. Well, you could stop, look into each other's eyes, and just see the beauty in another person. And you can be present to life and make that transaction a transformational opportunity. So that's really all I want to say there, is to reflect on what percentage of your work right now is spent in the transaction, what percentage is in the transformation, how is that balance for you? And see if you can enrich your life by shifting it more toward finding transformational. We still have to do the transactional, but that's not where we want to spend our life. Now, what transcendent leadership is finding a cause that lifts you out of both of those, that says, what is the why that takes us out of both of those and that makes your life truly impactful? Now, my dad was the one, many of you have seen this slide. My dad was the Canadian gymnastics champion back in the 1940s. He used to walk around the house on his hands. I didn't ever think there was anything particularly unusual about that, but until I had friends come over and say, that's pretty cool. So my dad was my track coach in high school, and he inspired me to have a purpose for running track. And so he inspired me to want to train for the Canadian Olympic team. I was actually training for the 1980 Olympics. Now, I think he knew that I didn't have the genetic ability to make the Olympic team. I think he understood that, but that never came into the equation. What he had is he inspired me to set a dream to make the Olympic team, so that when I got up and worked out in the morning, I wasn't getting up and having a workout. I was getting up and training for the Olympics. And it was a whole different mindset. And he always said, the purpose of having a dream is not to achieve the dream. The purpose of having a dream is to inspire yourself to become the kind of person that it takes to achieve your dream. So the dream is what gets you up early. The purpose is what gets you up early. And he was the first person to plant these seeds of the importance of having a purpose, having a reason to get yourself out of the transactional, having a reason to show up in the world in the morning. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood and don't assign them to tasks and work, but rather inspire them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. What awakens us? What gets us up early? What keeps us up late? This is what we begin to move toward when we begin to think about this thing called purpose and a noble cause. This is a very good friend of mine. He's been a friend of mine for years. We wrote a couple of books together in the early 2000s. Now, this is Jim Rieger, he's kind of winding his career down now, but back in the 70s, he worked directly with Bill and Dave, the founders of HP, and they had roughly 40,000 employees, some employees back in the 1970s. And I have learned so much from Jim over the years about organizational culture. And Jim would say that Bill and Dave, the founder of Hewlett Packard, had a vision that every single one of those 40,000 people would have a higher purpose for why they came to work, would have a noble cause. And the story goes, back in those days, they used to assemble computers with an assembly line. And they took a customer into one of the plants, into one of these assembly lines, and the customer was watching these people assemble by hand these computer motherboards. And the story goes that one of these customers asked this woman who was putting a motherboard into a computer chip, into a computer, "What are you doing?" And she looked up with a smile on her face, and she said, "I'm saving babies' lives." And she said, "What do you mean you're saving babies' lives?" And she said, "Oh yes, you see, this computer is going into neonatal hospitals, into prenatal neonatal care, and it's going into incubators that is monitoring the heart rate of premature babies." And she understood that she wasn't just doing a job, she was living for a higher purpose. Okay? This is the power of purpose. Success, Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor, said, like happiness, cannot be pursued. It must ensue, and it can only do so as the unintended side effect of one personal dedication to a cause greater than yourself. So the question I'm going to ask you is to discover is, what is the purpose? What is your why? Now, I want to make it clear, and we'll get into this in much more detail in the academy, in the 3-day course, but we talk about the difference between the outer purpose and an inner purpose. And the outer purpose is, what are you called to do with your life? What are you meant to do? And many people struggle with this, and they, how do I know what my purpose is? And I say, let's start with an inner purpose. What are you called to be in your life? I don't know how many of you have ever read this little book called The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie Mackay. Charlie Mackay. And it's a beautiful dialogue between the boy and the mole and the fox and the horse. And the mole one day is sitting with this boy, and he says, "What are you going to be when you grow up?" And the little boy says, "I'm going to be kind." Now, this is a person who understands their inner purpose, who understands what kind of person do you want to bring to the world? And it doesn't have to be a big, massive purpose externally. You might feel called to an external purpose, but start with a sense of, how will you show up? What will your brand be? How will you be in the world? This is a wonderful place to start. So why do you get out of bed in the morning? The number one reason why I hear people get out of bed in the morning is to pee. Well, that's a good place to start. But I suggest you might want to go further than that, and to say, what gets you up early? What inspires you? And if you don't know what inspires you right now, then that only means one thing: you've been caught in the tyranny of the transaction. And I'm going to tell you, during this pandemic, when we've had to be so focused on protocols and doing things right, and we've been lost in the tyranny of the urgency. And I think it's impacting our mental health more than anything else. Burnout, as we say, does not come from hard work. It comes from heartache. It comes from being disconnected with our purpose, with the reason why we're here. And so one of the things that you can begin to do is to reawaken yourself through this process of beginning to reawaken your purpose. Now, I'm going to show you a little, it's a great time. I'm going to show you a 3-minute video. And many of you have seen this, but I want you to watch it through the eyes of purpose. It's actually a commercial by a Dutch pharmaceutical company. And it's a Christmas video, but it's applicable any time of year. But here's the only thing I want you to focus on. I want you to notice how this elderly gentleman was despairing when he got out of bed in the morning. He had no reason to get out of bed. And I want you to notice the birth of a purpose for him. This small little interaction changed his entire life and changed the people around him when he knew what his purpose was. And he transcended getting out of bed in the morning into something meaningful and purposeful, and it gave him energy to get on with his day. I've seen that video probably 100 times, and I can still get choked up every time I see that video. By the way, I forgot to remind you, and Kristen, make sure you remember too, feel free to put in the chat room your reaction to what we see going on here, and your thoughts and your reflections and your gratitudes and your resources that might be available, and even let people know where you're from. I want to hopefully over these next 8 weeks create a little community between us as best we can. So here's a question for you. What do you do? And if we had time together, we would have you pair up if we were in person. But you can do this back in your workplace or in your family. Just ask yourself, what do you do? And ask each other. You can interview each other. What do you do? And just describe what you do. And then ask yourself or ask your partner, why is that important to you? And when you answer that one, then say, why is that important to you? And when you answer that one, you ask, why is that important to you? And when you answer that one, why is that important to you? And you begin to drill down to the very core of why you're here. And this is the root that will come from truly transcendent leadership. I learned from Ernest Becker, who wrote a wonderful book called The Denial of Death. And his premise is that we spend our life denying death. And by the paradox, and I learned this from taking care of my brother while he died, what I learned in this is that the closer you get to death and the more that you embrace death, the more you actually begin to live. And what an immortality project is an endeavor that serves a noble cause and has an enduring value beyond one's life. So I would ask you to reflect. What would you describe right now as your immortality project? And it doesn't need to be anything other than what it comes from your heart. It doesn't need to be compared to how it measures up to other people. It can be truly yours if you sit still and truly reflect. How do I want to be remembered? How do I want to be remembered? I want to share with you, out of my brother's dying and out of this COVID experience, I would just want to share with you what my immortality project is. And I want to share it with you to inspire you perhaps to craft your own, so that you can really feel like you're working toward that. And it isn't the result that matters. This is what I learned from my dad. It didn't matter that I made it to the Olympic team. What mattered was, if I'm going to become the kind of person that it takes to get there, then I've got to get up early, and I got to work out, and I got to be strong, and I have to be a person of character no matter what the temperature is. I learned it doesn't matter whether it's 30 below or 30 above. I'm going to put my running shoes on and go out for a run, because that's who I am, because I'm training for something bigger. I'm not just working out, I'm training for something bigger. If folks, you're dealing with accountability in your organization and you can't get people accountable, don't try to get people accountable until they have a reason to be accountable. Once people have a reason, they'll get their heart into it, and you won't even have to worry about accountability. Then accountability will just be fine-tuning the process. What we got to do is focus on what are we doing to inspire people to find their purpose, to find their reason for coming to work. If you're not motivated, you don't have enough reasons yet. If you're not motivated to get your health in order, you just don't have enough reasons yet. Now you say, you know what, I want to be strong enough for my grandkids when I'm 80 years old to get down on the floor with my grandkids, and I don't want this body to stop me from doing what I want to do with my grandkids or for my community. I want this body to carry me. I don't want this body to slow me down. Now you have a reason to take care of your health, rather than just some expectation that some rule that you're supposed to put on yourself to take care of your health. You got to reach deeply if you're not motivated, or find something else. Maybe it's not important to you, that value. But this is what I'm going to share with you, what's come out of this pandemic for me. And it began in the work that I did when I took care of my brother. You know, it's really interesting. One of the last days of his life, he could hardly talk, and I hadn't heard a word from him for months. And I'd been taking care of him. I was bathing him, I was shaving him, I was massaging his feet, stuff I never thought I'd ever do for a brother. And he had a brain tumor, so he had dysphagia. He couldn't talk. He hadn't talked for months. And I said, I asked him, I didn't expect a response. And I asked him, I said, Hal, what advice do you have for your little brother? And he opened his eyes and in perfect clarity said, David, follow your voice. And then he closed his eyes. It's the last voice. That's the last words I ever heard from him. And I said, Hal, what do you mean? And that's all he had. But this is what I feel like I've been following my voice. And this is my vision that I want to share with you, is that I want to, in the coming 10 years, in this next chapter of their life, we will build a diverse community of 1,000 authentic, caring difference makers who are committed to learn together, support each other, and help hold each other accountable. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to reach 1 million people with my message. This is what I really want to do for people who want to be a part of this community, to support people to really be authentic and caring. Now, the end result isn't what matters to me. What matters is this inspires me to say, I want to engage with people in this way. Now, why do I want to do that? Is I'm going to learn how to build a team. I can't do that alone. So we're building a team, and I'm inviting people to come in on. And Kristen here has been an amazing leader on this team to say, I want to contribute to this. She's a giver. She says, I want to get on board and give to this cause. This is really a movement that I really want to be helping to lead. I will build capacity around me that will outlive me. I want to build a team of leaders that will carry on when I'm not here. It gives me deeper meaning in my life. And I want to create a legacy. And my term around legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's the difference that you're making now. And this is what drives me. This is what gets me up early. And if this aligns with, I want to just support you with what your own personal leadership is at a transcendent level. So again, I just would invite you to this academy. Next week, we're going to cover, I just began to introduce you to this notion of transcendent leadership, to have you reflect on this. Next week, we're going to switch gears and we're going to look at the module around credibility through character. So I hope that's been useful to you. It's a very short amount of time that we have together each week, but I appreciate you joining me. And I hope that this has been somewhat inspiring for you and reflective. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to come back.